You're listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by a machinist. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson of Protean Machining, and this week I'm joined by Jeff Sapp of Okluma. Welcome, Jeff. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, for sure.
So before we get into your backstory, what is Okluma? What do you do now? Where can they find you online? All the good stuff.
All right, so Okluma, we make LED stuff, mostly flashlights, but then every now and then we'll just kind of make off-the-wall stuff. And we're on Instagram mostly. I post a lot there. I post stories up. We do have a Facebook group, but Instagram's kind of where I hang out mostly. What was the other question?
Where can they find you online?
Yeah, Instagram or okluma.com. We got our stuff up for sale on okluma.com. So.
Oh, that was it. So let's get into, how did you get to where you are now? Because you've got some new machinery in the last year, and it seems like you're constantly just out of stock and blowing up. So, how did you get to that point?
Yeah, it's a little wild. So in high school, I worked in a machine shop growing up. I think I started working there when I was like 15. It's called Mertz. It's in Ponca City, Oklahoma. And they made really big equipment for companies like Caterpillar and Halliburton. And I don't know if you remember it was kind of like the world's biggest dump truck that made a big deal about in the 90s. Mertz made the bed for that, for Caterpillar.
Oh, geez. So when you're talking big stuff,
that's really, really big stuff. And so that was kind of where I got introduced to machining.
How'd you jump into that job? I mean, it seems like kind of a random thing.
Yeah, it was a family friend. He was the general manager there, and mostly I started when I was 15, so I just ran errands and cleaned. Eventually I ended up working on the computers a little bit, but I did get to do a little bit of machining. I rode BMX bicycles a lot at the time. And my first real machining project where I was highly supervised was to make an axle. So I think that was probably 1995. We made an axle for a 20-inch BMX bike.
Oh, cool.
It was kind of the first thing. I still have one of the original ones that we made.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. And I just got to see a lot of the stuff that those guys would do, which is just kind of amazing. Back in the 90s, there weren't cell phones and there wasn't the internet really. It was just a bunch of old, really talented guys doing, I don't know, just cool stuff. So let's see, that was probably 95-ish. And then I worked there till I was about 18 or 19 and I went to college. And when I went to college, I bought, the Grizzly mini mill and the mini lathe and just kind of drug those around with me for quite a while, probably, 10 years or so. And then I think around 2008, 2009, I ended up going back to Votech school. I went to Francis Tuttle in Oklahoma City and went through their machining program, start to finish, started with a file and then ended up, on the CNC machines. And then eventually ended up doing little substitute teaching work for them.
Oh, cool.
So, yeah, that was kind of fun.
And that's where the OK and Okluma comes from?
Yeah, that's right. It was kind of a joke. My friend made up that name and he was like, Okluma, because at first we were OK Lumen, and he's like, no, man, you got to change the name. I was like, okay, what do you got? And he's like, what about Okluma? It was close enough to Okuma. I was like, oh, that's cool. And it was a little bit abstract. And then some people don't know if they're supposed to say OK Luma or, there's a little bit of ambiguity there. I kind of like that. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, well, I would fully admit the first time I saw something of yours pop up on Instagram, I was like, Kuma's posting some interesting stuff.
Yeah, we did a few little magnets. I had a buddy mock up a SVG with their logo and our name, and we made a few Okuma magnets. Of course, they only went to friends, no one saw those, but yeah, we did make a few of those.
That's very cool. So yes. You went back to Votech school. How did you decide to start making flashlights, or what was that even a decision or just kind of a happenstance?
It was kind of weird. I went on a motorcycle trip, and right before I left, I bought it was an off-road motorcycle trip, rode up to Canada and then down to Mexico on the Continental Divide. And right before I left, I bought a pretty expensive flashlight. I thought, it was like $60 or $70. And I was in Southern Colorado somewhere. It was I hadn't been out very long. And I hit a bush and pulled out a fuel line, and I was like, okay, I got this. It was dark. I grabbed the flashlight and went to turn it on, and it didn't turn on. And I was pretty bummed about that.
Oh no.
Yeah, it wasn't a huge deal. The fuel didn't come out that fast, so I got it all taken care of. But the real bummer was I got back once I got home. I called the company. I was like, "Hey, man, can I get this fixed?" And they're like, "No, no, we don't fix them. You just have to buy a new one." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So that was kind of like I was like, oh, I think I could do better than this. That was mechanical stuff breaks. We all know that. It's like,
Right.
wears out, you use it, it breaks, it just happens. So that was fine. That wasn't a big deal. It was just the fact that they wouldn't fix it. I was a little irked that they were just so cavalier about, oh, just throw it away and buy a new one. So yeah, so I got on the internet and found a flashlight forum, and there was a dude who was making some flashlights. I kind of looked for one of his, but he wasn't making them anymore. And I was like, I've got a lathe. I could probably just make one of those. So I made four, and I was like, I'll just make one for myself and make three and sell those three. And the three were gone in a weekend. And I was like, oh, hey, this is kind of cool.
Oh
So
wow.
I made those at that time I had a LeBlanc lathe in the garage. So I made four on the LeBlanc lathe, sold them in a weekend. And then the next, like a couple of weeks later, I think I made 20. And then, I did a couple batches of 20 and it just kind of got out of hand. And then maybe like a year or two later, I was able to afford the Daewoo Lynx that we have now, or one of the Daewoo Lynxes, excuse me, one of the Lynxes that we have now. So,
That's awesome. Yeah,
yeah.
it seems like that's a origin story of a lot of people as a pain point in your life, and you'd be happily paying for something and it doesn't exist.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like, oh, I think I could do this. And there was a guy and he had some, and I really liked his design. He just wasn't doing it anymore. And I was like, I guess I can make one of these. So it was kind of fun.
And where did you source all your electronics when you started in the beginning? Because I know one of our
Oh,
questions from Cody Gibson was, what's the process of starting a flashlight? I think he wanted to make his own. So,
oh, Cody, you should send me a message and I'll just walk you through it. There's a lot of different places online. Mountain Electronics is a big popular place. They're stateside. And then there's Kai Domain. They're in China, I believe. There's a couple places like that. And you can just buy components, bits and pieces, drivers, emitters, switches, buttons, stuff like that. So,
okay,
yeah.
cool. And that's what you started with, was just buying stuff off the shelf and then making the packaging for it?
All off the shelf stuff. And I think pretty much everything is made for us with the exception of a few small parts. Just like to get things just right. It was like, we need to have someone make this. But yeah, off the shelf is the way to go. It's super easy. You can get a driver, some emitters, a switch, and spend, a weekend on a lathe and have a flashlight. It's not too hard.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's something I will probably end up having to do because I've got a lathe sitting there, and
Yeah, you
I'll
might
find the
as well.
time. Yeah.
It's kind of funny. You had Jason from Prometheus on
Hmm.
like not too long ago. He had a machinist kit on his website, and that was kind of how I got started, actually. So,
Oh, really?
yeah,
Okay.
yep,
That's awesome.
yeah. He's super cool, dude. He's a super nice guy.
So far, I mean, it's only been you and him, but everybody I've met in the flashlight community has been pretty fantastic. So, where are you at now? What does Okluma look like? What kind of machinery do you have? What's the company look like?
All right, so we just moved from Oklahoma City to we just moved. It was probably close to a year ago now. We moved from Oklahoma City to Colorado Springs. I had two great employees in Oklahoma City, and they both ended up staying in Oklahoma City. So it's just me right now. We've got the LeBlanc lathe that I started everything on. We had a Bridgeport for a little bit, but I sold that just for the space. We've got the original Daewoo Lynx. It was made in 1999, and we made most of the flashlights on that. We've got a Doosan D&M 4500 that I kind of use for fixtures and just kind of like odds and ends and stuff like that. And then we recently got the Doosan Lynx LSYB, which is just an amazing machine. I'm like so happy with it. It's fantastic. Like we had some parts that we were doing on the old Lynx and the D&M 4500 where we had clip holes and you'd have to so we do one up and then put it in the mill and then drill and tap a hole and then rotate it by hand in a fixture, drill and tap another hole, put it back in the lathe, and then do the final op. So you had like a 4-op part between those two machines. And then the new Lynx has, you know, a sub-spindle. It's got Y, and it just like, I can just load in a bar and it makes those parts and they're perfect. It's pretty amazing. I mean, it took some work, you know, it took some work to get them perfect, but yeah, you just load in like a 4-foot long bar and it's pretty magic.
So since it's fresh in your mind, let's jump into the lathe aspect. Both
Yeah.
Joe from Cobra Frame Building and Fort Manufacturing were asking about the lathe. Joe was kind of interested in what the real world expectation should be, because, you know, a lot of people talk a big game of like, oh, sub-spindle lathes and live tooling, and it's the print money button and like it's super easy. And it doesn't seem, you know, the more you dive into it, it seems like, maybe that's not the full case.
Yeah. Well, first, before you print money, you have to like shell out a whole bunch of money. That's just kind of the way it works. The machine wasn't cheap, you know, and then tooling is never cheap. It's manufacturing. That's just the way it works. The live tool holders are expensive, you know, they kind of go from like anywhere from $2,000 to $7,000 or $8,000 a piece, which is a little bit more than I was expecting, but you know, whatever. They are fantastic. Like they're so capable machines. I need to be kind of vague about this, but I was talking to someone who works on these machines a lot, and I asked him for an example of live tooling. Like I've done quite a bit of the G code by hand, not with Fusion. And so he was sending me some code to help me out with that. And he sent me a file called upperreceiver.nc. Yeah, this company ran upper receivers on, I think it was a Puma. It was the next step up, but they run lights out upper receivers in a lathe, which was just like, I was like, it just blew my mind. I was like, wow, that's crazy.
That's a lot of mill work to put in a lathe.
Yeah. Yeah, the local Doosan Tech was telling me that some companies just sell their mills. You know, they get a bunch of Pumas and they sell their mills and run parts off a bar. So they're certainly capable machines. It's not, you know, it's not easy. It's not easy to get going, I don't think, but once you get going, it's pretty amazing.
So the other things he wanted to know, like, what about programming and sub spindle clearances and all that? Like, how much dialing in are you having to do to get a program where you're happy?
So let's see. So we had those parts that we were running on the old links, and it probably took me 2 to 3 days to stick the programs together, and then to get the spindle transfer right, and then to get the, you know, the origin set right on the sub spindle, and then get the tools moved over. And just like some of that was a learning process with the lathe. You know, like we figure out what tools fit in which holders and how much clearance you need between the back of the turret, which is actually an issue. I was kind of surprised by that, but between the back of the turret and the sub. So that took some work. I was a little surprised by that. I did think it was going to be a little more magic, but yeah, we got it working.
And then what about like chip management? Are you comfortable to the point where you feel good, you know, leaving it for hours on end, just making parts, or is it something that you still feel like you need to check in on periodically?
So occasionally there's a few of the parts we make where I need to work on the chip control a little bit better. The chips will actually accumulate in the collet in the sub spindle, and it's usually not a big deal. The parts catcher will usually like give me an error and it'll just stop running. But we have smushed a part or two between the sub and the main spindle. When the sub goes to grab it, there's a part that's like kind of stuck on the edge of the collet and just like smushes them, and then that obviously an error. So, but I feel pretty comfortable, you know, like loading in a 4-foot bar and just like letting it run. It's really.
Did you get a bar feeder with that?
I did not. Our cycles are, we've run all that titanium, and the cycle times on just a single 4-foot bar is pretty good, you know.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
that definitely makes sense.
Plus, the mill is sitting where the bar feeder would go, so yeah.
That would make it a little hard for sure.
Yeah, we did. When we moved from Oklahoma City to Colorado Springs, we had to downsize quite a bit. We had a 4,500 square foot shop in Oklahoma City just because it was so cheap. Like it was ridiculously cheap.
That sounds so lavish.
It was, well, we had quarter pipe. We had a big mini ramp for bicycles and skateboards in the old shop. It was that, and a climbing wall.
Wow.
It was absurd. You know, it was close to my house. The rent was obscenely cheap. It wasn't in the best part of town, but you know, and then we moved up here, and I think, I think we're at like 2,000 square feet or 1,800 square feet, and the rent is not quite double, but close. So,
Ooh,
yeah. But,
yeah, you got to do what you got to do. Totally.
yeah, yeah.
So then on to Ben from Fort Manufacturing's question. So he said, knowing what you know now, would you have upgraded to a Y-axis sub-spindle lathe sooner?
I don't think so. I think just because we make flashlights, it's mostly round stuff. I was a little bit adverse to having debt. Like the New Lynx was the first machine that we actually took out of Note 4, and I thought it was a good time to do it. We lost 2 employees. Now it's just me. I was trying to like figure out a way to like take the burden off me, like automate things a little bit more, and it just made sense to go ahead and take the leap and do the lathe. But if I was a job shop, I would absolutely just do it. I'd be like, okay, I can run all these parts on this lathe, and I'd just do it.
Okay. And then what do you see as an absolute must-have options for a lathe?
Oh, like I really think that depends on the parts you're running. If they're just simple parts, you can do that with an X and a Z. It doesn't take a lot. Our old Lynx didn't even have a parts catcher, so we had like a yoga mat and a little crate, and we had a little tuning with the yoga mat and a few magnets, and you could like get the parts to roll off and not bump each other. So, it's not ideal, but we made it work. But having the Y and the sub and parts, like we don't even just have a parts catcher, we have a conveyor now, which is just amazing. Like they just roll out of the lathe and you don't even have to get your hands wet. I mean, they get a little wet, but not too bad,
Right. Right. So are there any options that you skipped out on that you wish you had got? No?
The high pressure coolant would have been maybe a nicer option to get. We've got a few deep holes in titanium, and it would be a little bit nicer to get the chips out, but it's not too big of a deal. We'll see what else. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with it so far. Pretty happy with it.
Okay. So you've mentioned titanium. That's somewhat of a pain sometimes. Rabbit Pickup asked, what's the worst and best material to work with, or that you work with?
I actually like titanium a lot. I like titanium more than I like aluminum. You just got to run it a little bit slower and don't expect it to cut like aluminum, and you'll be fine. The materials I hate are like any of the Damascus style materials, with 2 materials or 3 materials welded together and then twisted, and like you hit hard spots in those, and it's like an interrupted cut all the time, and it's super noisy and it's hard on the tools, but people really like that stuff. So it's not my I don't like that material at all.
I think you're not the first person on this show to have said that. I think Josh Hacko said very similar about making Damascus main plates for his watches.
Yeah, and then some of that stuff, like the dark Damascus, has zirconium in it. I've had a few zirconium fires. Like I really try to avoid that, but that's happened a few times before. Not fun. Not fun at all.
I've seen a titanium fire in a machine, or I saw titanium light magnesium that was not washed out. And it was thankfully nothing bad happened, but it was like, oh no. Of course, like all of the guys were just standing around kind of watching it for about 5 seconds while the only female machinist around ran off to get the fire extinguisher and came back and said, what the hell are you guys doing?
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, the worst fire we had was actually in the LeBlanc lathe. And
really?
It was at the end of the day, and I was just tired, and I was just roughing some material in. Because it comes with like a bow in it. It's not perfectly straight. It's got the weird crusty stuff on the outside, and I was just cutting that off and getting it straight enough that I could actually put it in the spindle liner, and I was just not being careful and caught the chip tray on fire and had to pull the chip tray out, and I definitely needed a fire extinguisher for that. So,
yes, no fun.
No, but it was better than catching your $140,000 lathe on fire. So
totally. Oh yeah,
it was like no big deal.
So in that same vein, Stang Bladeworks asked, how do you handle customers requesting options over and above what you offer, or materials over and above what you offer?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've got some weird requests. Like we've had some customers request like gold and silver or platinum.
Oh, geez.
And I just say no. It's like, no, this isn't worth the liability. And then, some things the customer will ask for, and I think it's just a bad idea. We used to anodize a lot of titanium, and it just doesn't wear very well, or like it looks amazing. Like when you first do it and you take a picture of it, it looks fantastic. But then once it's been in your pocket for like 6 months, it just doesn't look very good. So I do my best to be smart about, what's going to be the best for the customer. And I don't mind telling the customer no. I'll just be like, I'm sorry, we don't do that. We don't do this. When we first started, I was like, I would jump through hoops and do anything. If the customer wanted like, I don't know, weird machined features in the light, I would do that. And now I just don't. Now, the code is running and it works good and it's so dialed and there's not a chance I'm going to mess with it. So,
Right.
yeah.
Right. His other question was, do you prefer, well, it sounds like you have answered that, but do you prefer regular production or one-off high-end project?
Definitely the production stuff. I always feel a little bit, the production, or excuse me, the high-end projects kind of get out of hand. It's like, all right, well, the shop rate's $100 an hour or $120 an hour, and this is going to take me 40 hours, and this is just going to be obscene. I was like,
Right.
no, that's a bad idea. Someone else will do that for you, but we're busy, so.
That's a fair answer. I mean,
Yeah.
I know that there are definitely people out there who would gladly quote 40 hours, but
Yeah.
it sounds like you're having fun doing what you're doing, and that's what matters.
Yeah. I really enjoy making flashlights, and it's fun. And then sometimes you just gotta say no. So.
And then also, Doug Dimaglow asked, how do you feel when people hit you up to work with new materials? So are there any new materials recently that you have started working with that you hadn't in the past?
So we just did a few lights out of dark Timascus, and that was, again, not my favorite.
Right.
Those
Zirconium in general, I've heard kind of bad things about.
Yeah, we've done that. We've done zirconium, just like straight up zirconium, for quite a while, and I don't like it. It catches on fire, and I don't like fires. So if you're careful, it's not too bad. But like the crazy materials, you really have to. There's a lot more work that goes into those lights, and like more than just machining them. You gotta have like a perfect surface finish on them. They gotta be polished. Then you gotta usually torch them to bring the color out, and you got to get that right. And if that's not right, you kind of got to start back at, you don't have to obviously machine the part again, but you got to start the finish over again.
Right.
So, yeah, not a fan. I really like just straight titanium. It wears really well, and I can make them. I'm good at making them now. So,
yeah, titanium's always been very consistent in my experience. Like,
yep.
It will wear your tools, but like that wear you can track and kind of get down. So
yeah.
So I guess in that same vein, what's the oddest request you've gotten that you have done or that you haven't done that you can share?
Oh, for flashlights?
Yeah.
Or just in general?
Or just in general, yeah, sure.
Let's see. We have a customer who saw a jaguar, like one of the animals, and he needed a mount. He bought a jaguar hood ornament from a car, and he needed a mount to mount the jaguar on his bicycle because he saw it while he was riding his bicycle. And so we made a little mount for a jaguar hood ornament to fit on his bicycle. I'm trying to think of some of the other. We've done some off the wall stuff before. That's probably one of the strangest. We made a Nalgene lantern. That was kind of like my project. That was one of the projects that I did. We took a Nalgene lantern and then built the light into the lid of the Nalgene.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, it was kind of cool. It turned out to be a little clunky. Like I just wasn't happy with it. So we might revisit it in the future. Probably won't. We've got too many other projects I want to do, but it was kind of a fun, really strange project. So
speaking of projects, you recently have been posting a lot about a bike light.
Oh yeah.
How's that going?
Not as fast as I would like it to go. So I've done like 3 or 4 different bicycle lights. And like I'm a cyclist and I'll get some idea in my head and I'll work on it and hit some point and be like, okay, this is definitely a problem in the design. There's no designing around this. Maybe I should start back over. So I think I'm on my fourth iteration, and I'm really happy with it right now. I don't know if you guys have seen pictures of it. We had some of them up on the Instagram. It's pretty ugly right now, but it worked really well. I just did that race in Utah,
Right.
and it was like, yeah, worked pretty well for that. Yeah, the front hub on my bike charged the battery, and then I was able to use the battery to charge my cell phone like when I was asleep, and then power the light while it was running. And I finished in like 2 days before I left for the race. It was it was that's how all my projects go. So, but it worked pretty well. I'm pretty happy with it, and I've got a lot of sketches and one model that is promising, and I'm
Okay.
definitely working on it right now. So, and I've got a few writers helping me. I've got some buddies who are pretty talented writers, and they've been giving me some feedback. So, I don't think I'm going to have anything for sale by the end of the year, but I'd like to have a prototype or two out in, for testing kind of early spring. I think that's doable. So,
Okay. Yeah, I think you posted it either in your stories or something about the difference between like a tail cap switch and the microprocessor switch.
oh yeah, the difference between the E switch and just a mechanical switch.
Yeah,
That's
it seems like it breaks the laws of physics, like the fact that like the E switch draws less power than the battery normally discharging.
I am not sure I described that correctly in my stories.
Okay.
So I am just gonna like say that, especially if you put me on the spot, I'm sure I'll get it wrong. But yeah, it doesn't take very much for the low power microprocessors to wake up, check to see if the button has been pushed, and then go back to sleep. So
Okay.
it's pretty. They're pretty low power.
That's still pretty cool.
It's fun,
It's
and
impressive.
it lets you do some weird stuff, because the switch of the flashlight usually needs to. It, Previously, like the mechanical switch would need to break the circuit between the battery, and that's how they worked. And then the E switch can go anywhere you really want to put it, as long as you can run a wire to the chip where you can check it. So, kind of opens up some like new design doors that are fun. So.
Yeah, that's great. That's really cool. So, speaking of all these projects, Raymond Freeman asked, where do you find the balance between creating and everything else?
I have not managed to find a balance between that yet. It's like I really, really enjoy the creating part. Like that's my absolute, like I love doing that. I'll wake up in the middle of the night and think of something, be like, oh, that's a cool idea. And then I'll be able to go back. But then there's stuff like dealing with your accountant or your CPA, and that's just a pain. But I feel like, we all have to do that, or so.
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah, I wish I didn't have to do that. I need to spend a little more time working on the creative side of thing. I've been making a point to do that lately. So, but if anyone comes up with a good idea on how to find a balance, like how to balance those two, please, please let me know, because I don't know.
That kind of question comes up very often in this show, and I think that we're all just searching for a good answer.
Yeah.
It's not easy for sure. Let's see. CHX Thorn asked, did you ever imagine you'd make such a successful and sought after product?
No, I had no idea. I just wanted a flashlight for myself. And then it's just, I don't know, it just kind of got out of hand. But I've got a shop full of cool machines now, so it's pretty fun.
Yeah, living the dream for sure.
Yeah.
And then John 2X asked, are you going to release a hat or a cap? He wanted more ways to support you.
Oh, I don't think so. Maybe we will. Maybe we will. I'll just say that now. I don't think we will, but maybe we will.
Okay. That kind of brings us to shop news and new things, unless there are any other stories or anything you wanted to share about the shop.
Not really. If you come visit the shop, anyone is welcome to come visit the shop. I should say that sometimes it's hard to get our flashlights. That's just kind of the way it is. We're a small shop. But if you take the time to come visit the shop, I will make sure you get a flashlight no matter what. That's the way it's been. I've had guys like when we were at Okluma City, some guy flew in from New York. We just had random stuff. But if you come by the shop, I'll make sure that you can get one. Just give me a little notice before you come by.
Okay. So. That's very generous. I know most people would not openly invite people.
Before I did this full time, I wrote software, and it involved me sitting in front of a desk alone a lot. Like I worked from home, and it was just like I didn't get to interact with people, and now I got to talk to people online, which is great. People come by my shop and say hi. I've made a lot of good friends. I've made a lot of good machinist friends. I just went and visited Eddie up at Nueva Precision
Oh yeah,
this last weekend. I saw his new Mori, but not new, but is
newer. Yeah,
newer.
yeah.
That was he's such a cool dude. And then Brad from Hourglass Machine just moved to the Springs. He's just down the road too.
Yeah.
So like I'm super happy that I get to interact with people more. Like I really like that. That's one of my favorite things about this job. So
That's
yeah,
great.
come by the shop. Say hi. Come by, have a beer. Come by. Even if you don't want a flashlight, just come by.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So I guess shop news, new things. You kind of talked about the bike light. Anything else? New products, new developments.
Yeah, we're kind of working on a work light. That's another one of those ideas I've had for quite a while. An electrical engineer who's been helping us with a driver. That's kind of the limiting factor, at least for me. Like I feel pretty comfortable with almost everything, but the low level electronic stuff. I'd like to get a pro's input on that stuff, and he's been helping us. We've got a driver that is efficient and has USB-C charging, which is kind of a cool thing.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
USB-C, all the things.
Oh, I know. Yeah, it's amazing. So
go for it.
Oh, I was going to say, I'm not sure when that's going to be done. He's kind of he does really good work, but he's very slow. No offense if you're listening, but yeah. So
okay.
I'm not sure when that'll get done, but yeah, I'm pretty happy with that.
Very cool. So speaking of drivers and all that, talk to me about how sourcing things for the last year or so has been for being a small company and then getting, electronics made and all that.
It hasn't been too bad. Like, I think it could have been worse. I tried to stay on top of that, like just getting some LEDs. Like that was our last big order. We just bought a whole bunch of LEDs on the boards. And I think they quoted me a 3-week lead time, and it ended up being quite a few. The drivers that we use, normally we use an Atmel 25, and those were hard to find. So we ended up going with a tiny 25. And then we ended up going with a tiny 13 just because we didn't need the 25. And they were a little bit harder to find. There's just kind of odds and ends like that. And it hasn't, like, we've had to work around a few things, but there hasn't been a showstopper yet. So, and I'm pretty stocked up right now. I think we'll be okay for the near future.
Okay. And then you mentioned being a small shop and, investing in automation like the lathe. What is the limiting factor for you getting more lights out? And what's the plan to deal with that? Or are you planning on dealing with that?
Right now it's probably assembly. The machine work is dialed in. It's automated right now. I can warm the lathe up, set the offsets, get things going, and be very happy with the parts that come out. The assembly takes quite a while. And that's all me. It's kind of hands-on, It takes anywhere from like 30 minutes to an hour to assemble a flashlight.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we've talked to Universal Robotics about maybe automating that part. I don't know. The company that I worked for when I was in high school, Mertz, the big shop. Mm-hmm. I'm still pretty good friends with the general manager there, and I talked to him about manufacturing stuff still. And I was like, I think we could be really big. I think if we put in obviously quite a bit of work, we could be a big company like Surefire or Maglite if that was like something that we wanted to do. And he's like, I don't know if you want to do that. You have a 3-year-old, you bring them to work, you show up at 9:00. You don't have any board meetings that you have to go to. you don't wear a suit or a tie.
Right.
And if you want to disappear for 2 weeks and go ride your bike, that's not a big deal. And you've got a shop full of machines and you can use them for anything you want. And, as soon as you have investors or like, if you want to like grow to that level, there's a lot of things that you can't do. And you should consider that. It's not that this is necessarily a bad thing, but you should certainly think about how good you have things right now. So I'm all for growing. I'm all for scaling up. And that's definitely the plan. But I also want to be, careful and at least thoughtful about what I want to do. And, I have it pretty good right now. I've got a cool shop. My 3-year-old comes to work with me most days. and we have a good time. We ride our bikes around the shop. So
That's great. No,
yeah, yeah,
that's I've definitely seen that come up in business books and stuff, that like you kind of have to evaluate where you actually want your company to grow. Like not everyone needs to be a Fortune 500 company, you
yeah,
know?
yeah. I think as long as that, as long as I'm doing creative work, kind of original work, I'm going to be happy. If we don't ever produce tens of thousands of flashlights a year, that's probably going to be okay. I'm not really going to be upset about it. I'm not going to be upset about that. As long as we're doing like cool stuff, as long as we're doing original work, that's what's really going to make me happy, I think.
Yeah, that sounds totally. What is about the assembly process takes the most time? Is that something that you would automate just to take it off your plate so you could do more creative stuff?
Yeah, I think so. There's the little, it's called the engine. It's the little copper piece that holds the driver and the emitter board. It takes a little bit to assemble. And then, you got to, it's not, um, that process of like assembly process is not 100% reliable right now. So it takes a little bit of work to get things right. And then there's just like a lot of fit and finish kind of stuff, like making sure that the champers all look right and making sure that the switch feels good and that it stands on its tail the way it's supposed to. So yeah, I think a lot of that stuff is tedious and I would like to get it off. I did mention that we had two employees previously,
Hmm.
and it was really easy for me to just throw work at them, be like, take care of this, and not think about the process at all. And it's been actually nice having to do it by myself and say, okay, this is not a process that anyone should be doing by hand. We could automate this, or at least, be a little bit more clever about how we're doing it. So I think it's been helpful. Uh,
Yeah, that's great.
yeah.
Is that something you're more apt to hire to take off your plate or to invest in automating, do you think?
I think invest in automating. I think
Okay.
like one of the things we do is we sandblast all the lights. That's like one of the first things that happens. And I don't think anyone should have to stand in front of a blasting cabinet and blast flashlights. That's just not. That's terrible. No one,
Yeah.
no one should have to do that.
Yeah.
So if I could automate that and like have a really consistent way of doing it, that would be fantastic. So
Well, you should check out, if you haven't, I'm sure you've seen it, but Danny Rudolph on Instagram.
I've
He's
seen his little robot. I actually bought all the parts that he used to make that robot, and it's one of those projects that I just have.
right. Yeah. You don't have time to do the
Yeah.
project to give you more time to,
Yeah.
I totally understand. Yeah.
So
It's tough. It's really tough. Well, that brings us to the final question of the evening, which is, what did you research this week? And it can be just, whatever is on your mind lately that you've been deep diving in.
yeah, okay. So I did research. We were talking about the bicycle light earlier,
Mhm.
and like most bicycle lights, I'll explain this for the audience. Most bicycle lights just run off a battery, and you put them on your handlebars. And for the particular style of riding I like to do, generally the lights run off your front hub. So like the front hub on your wheel will generate power, and you can use that to power your light or charge a battery in our case. And the specs on the hub say 6 volts, and they are not 6 volts. Like you'll see anything from like 1.5 volts to I think I saw 30 volts.
Whoa.
Yeah. And that was with a load too. Like I was just, yeah. So I've been working on a little test stand so we can plug that into a motor and see what the values actually are. So that was kind of something I've been working on, researching a little bit, trying to get that 30 volts back down to something usable that we can run into a driver without cooking the components. So
Yeah, I imagine that's really hard to deal with. Like that's quite the voltage spread.
it's wild, and it's hard to test too, because riding around at the parking lot with a multimeter in your hand is one thing, but if you're you're in a race and you're going like 45 miles an hour down a hill, I have no idea what's going on, and people do that pretty frequently. So
So talk to me about this race a little bit. I mean, you posted a little bit on your Instagram, and Joe talked about it a little bit. But what was this race, and what are you into besides Okluma?
yeah, so it was a 1,000-mile bike packing race, kind of ultra endurance sport. It's all unsupported, kind of underground a little bit. So there's no teams and Audi station wagons driving up and handing you water bottles. There's none of that. It's all like you bring your tent and a sleeping bag, put it on the back of your bike, and then eat at gas stations for 2 weeks. Yeah. So it was 1,000 miles across Utah. There was 80,000 feet of elevation change. So you just like went up and down and up and down. There was so much climbing. It was just obscene. And, I slept in Forest Service bathrooms. You slept in ditches, anywhere you could sleep. You stop around 1 a.m, get up at 6 or 7, and then ride for 16 hours and then do it all over again.
Holy cow.
Yeah. I've done some longer races. This one was only 1,000 miles. I've done the Tour Divide twice. And this was worse. The Utah race was just so much more climbing in a short period of time. I got stuck in a flash flood and I had to like leave my bike and get rescued. And then I thought the race was over, but then we were able to get the bike out of the mud and I was able to get going again. It was just crazy. It was just wild. It was so cool. So
how did you get into endurance bike racing like that?
I've always been riding bikes. Someone asked me that the other day and I was like, I never really stopped. I rode BMX as a kid and then I switched to riding mountain bikes, and it was just kind of like, it was just fun, like a hard way to push yourself. I'm not like a super fast cyclist, but I can sit on a bike and pedal and think about stuff for a long time. Just kind of fun way to stay in shape, think about stuff. So,
jeez,
yeah,
that's some endurance right there. That's really impressive.
Thanks.
And you had a light in case anything went wrong. That
I did.
It didn't break down on you. So
it didn't, everything else broke down, but the light was okay. So,
well, that's a great full circle then. In closing, Patreon thank yous. Thank you to Jake Giles and Tux Garage for joining the Patreon. Lets me send people like Jeff headsets so that we can, have interviews like this. And so I really appreciate everyone who backs the Patreon. And thank you so much, Jeff, for taking the time. It's been great chatting with you.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And thanks everyone for listening. We'll be back next week.